I guess really I was inspired by like movies like Wall Street with Gordon Gekko and things like that. And that kind of pulled me into another specialist area, low latency trading technology. So that was very cutting edge. And I got myself kind of deep into that. These days, there's about 200 different jobs in that stack, if not more. And every 6 months, it doubles and multiplies. So it's not really possible for everyone to know everything. You have to specialize. It's about building the foundations of a house. So building a house, you need to have foundations, right? You don't put the roof in before you've actually built the walls, put the windows in, put the foundations there, etc. Put some stairs in, right? The CISO is the roof. If you're going to take a technical route, you need to kind of have a technical background, understand the things that need to be secured before trying to secure them.
Perry's seen cybersecurity change dramatically, especially in financial services where Kyndryl's been helping European banks navigate DORA and NIS2 compliance. He's a MITRE ATT&CK defender, former Juniper ambassador, and somehow still finds time to pursue a master's in cybersecurity. Welcome to the show, Perry.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be on this. Yeah, I've been looking forward to this one for a little while since I was speaking to Vivek at SquareX.
Oh, excellent. Well, thanks for being on the podcast. Well, let's start with a little bit about your career. You've spent a large portion of your career in the financial services industry. How did you get started there? And what's the story behind pivoting to a new industry with Kyndryl?
Okay, well, it's a very long story. I can barely remember when I started this, back in pre-turn of the millennium. So I guess really I was inspired by like movies like Wall Street with Gordon Gekko and things like that. I really wanted to kind of be in a stable industry that was cutting edge, that paid well, really, if I'm honest with you, at the time. So I always had in my mind maybe a bank would be the right place to go to. And that kind of spurred me to kind of move to London from where I was living. And I kind of got myself into networks at a very early time. PCs were just starting to be networked. I'd just been outsourced by IBM at the time, interestingly. So I became an IBM employee and they said, hey, do you want to do some network stuff? So I'm like, well, yeah, I'm really interested in that. I've been getting involved in TCP IP, which is very new at the time. And lo and behold, I fell into that and got myself very deep into network engineering, network design. I did all the Cisco certifications, which were a very new thing at the time. And then I caught the bug, really, and that kind of took me forward. I've been doing server stuff before that. So that took me down to London, and I kind of plugged myself into aspects of the financial sector, technology around the network, mostly financial markets. And that kind of pulled me into another specialist area, low latency trading technology. Mm-hmm. So that was very cutting edge, still is cutting edge. And I got myself kind of deep into that, how to engineer the minute low latency connectivity between machines trading with other machines.
So we were talking a lot about network engineering, and I often think that today, in today's world, we actually needed to know how TCP/IP worked. We had to know how packets were moving. Troubleshooting was getting a sniffer out and kind of taking a look at what was happening. And I think that in today's world, we kind of brush by it. We have so many abstractions that I feel like a lot of people don't really understand how the technology is actually working. Like what can you do with it? How can you push it? And there are definitely people that do know how that happens, but from a cybersecurity perspective, you're going from a very, hands-on network engineering, technical kind of activity, and now you're leading global cybersecurity functions. That's how did that transition happen?
Well, you see, I never actually left the trenches. And so my view is that, an officer in the army still carries a gun and can fire it, right?
Sure.
So really, I think it's an interesting thing, right? So there's an assumption that you can be in cybersecurity and not know technology. Okay, it's kind of like you've got a CFO on the board, standing up and saying, "Hey, I know nothing about finance, but," it doesn't happen, does it? Right? But for some reason in cybersecurity, it's assumed that you can be non-technical to some degree. I disagree. I've always been grounded in understanding the tech to some degree, whether or not I'm hands-on, touching CLIs, inputting commands, etc. I've done less of that over time. I still do it in my own time, but in my role, I do less of that. I do sometimes though, still. But I think it's important to stay current. And as you say, there are levels of abstraction that come along, and you can't know everything. I think back in the day when I started, I could do some stuff around networks, servers, printers, telephony. I was doing everything end to end. I could do everything end to end. These days, there's about 200 different jobs in that stack, if not more. And every 6 months, it doubles and multiplies. So it's not really possible for everyone to know everything. You have to specialize. And this is why you've got levels of abstraction. There's more complexity over time, not less. You start throwing in cloud. You have the underlay for cloud. You have abstraction layers. You now have AI over the top. You have something else over the top. Orchestration. I don't know. It's just, you can't know everything. But I do still feel it's good to understand some of the fundamentals. I think that's essential. And from my perspective, I feel I need to stay current with tech because it's evolving. It helps me do a better job as a tech advisor. But it also helps me understand the challenges as well when I'm speaking to customers and so on, putting something together. You just simply can't do that if you don't understand the tech.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that, I got into computers, in the early 80s, right? As a student, still probably junior high or something like that, but, play with computers going through junior high, high school, into college, and understand the technology, like how it works, right? I think is kind of key to being a CISO, right? I think it's really hard to be a CISO if you don't fundamentally understand the technology that's going around, and not just the technology, because I think that like you said, you're not going to know everything, and I'm like you. I spent a lot of time on my own learning new technologies, trying to deploy things in my own little environments that I set up to test whatever I'm going to test, and just keeping current. Because I think that's what I love. Fundamentally, it's what I love, right? Is technology, and that I can do something in cyber, I think is awesome. And because I think being in cyber is incredibly challenging. Like being a CISO is an incredibly challenging role, because it's not just one stack that you're worried about. Your stack, the one that you're deploying right now, that's not what you have to worry about as a CISO. You have to worry about, 200 different stacks, or 1,500 business units, or 100 business units, and 1,500 ways of that they're doing things. And all of them are different. They're all using different programming languages, different database technologies, different, web-based tech, some are in the cloud. So you're it's all over the place. With respect to how companies like deliver.
So just to jump on that, right? So you yourself will say the same thing. In the past, you might have been looking at command line specifics, maybe looking at how you configure a search in a SIM platform or something like that. But as you go up the ranks in cybersecurity, you don't necessarily need to know that command syntax, but you do need to understand the conceptuals around the tech.
Yes,
so it's like you take it from one level to another level. It's still technical understanding, but do you need to know the minute pieces? Maybe not.
I agree. Like I said, I agree. I think but definitely having that foundation that you actually have done it, you've been in the trenches, you've done the work, that stays with you forever. I mean, it's not just because you transition from a very technical role to a leadership role doesn't really change, how your mind works and how you solve problems, right? There's a lot, there's a lot kind of built into, your early years and how they kind of, shape you kind of going forward as a leader. I know finance enough to be dangerous, but definitely don't let me run your finance team, right? If you know what I mean, right? It's kind of like
it's a means to an
I
end. You
can
have to
sell
get to
it,
some.
right? I know there's a CFO somewhere, right? So, but don't as far as like, hey, how do you build these things, right? I mean, I could probably help you build an accounting system. I could probably help you build the reports that you want to look at and those kinds of things. But I definitely wouldn't mean that I'm the right person to interpret it. And I think it's kind of the same kind of flip on the cyber side. It's you need leaders that understand what it is that everyone's doing, right, from a technology perspective, and then kind of using that to make better decisions, right? And I think that's kind of what you're telling me, is that you didn't really step away from tech. Being a security leader is, you're still heavily involved in technology.
Yeah, I think the skill that comes out through this industry and through this career path, it's maybe not the same in other career paths, but specifically with this one, is having to navigate yourself around certain challenges. And I'll give you a good example. So if I was doing network or security and it relates to a particular type of system, could be a ERP system, SAP or something like that. I might not be a specialist in that, but I have to learn it pretty damn quickly to kind of be able to secure it or do whatever I need to do with it. Similarly, finance, you need to figure something out so you can get the job done. And I find that people are in cybersecurity or this kind of professional role are very adept at learning stuff really quickly under pressure to get the job done. And it's multifaceted. So I think that's quite unique.
I think the only other role that's kind of similar in some ways is the CIO role, because they have a lot of technology that they're delivering. We have a lot of technology that we're securing, but I don't know if people really get like the breadth and depth of the challenge, right? Because you're not really involved as a CISO. You don't build the business strategy. You hope to be involved. You're not building the technology strategy either, right? You want to influence, right? But once those decisions are made, as a CISO, we're trying to figure out, like, how do we reduce the risk in the best way? Keep everything operating, but also reduce the regulatory or external threat or insider threat kind of risks that are inherent in technology systems. And it can be a very challenging role. I mean, I think for me, it's a lot of fun. I like it that there's always another challenge. There's always something else that needs to change. And we get to kind of be, right there with the pace of change. And again, if you love technology and you love cyber, I mean, it's a great role to be in, being a cybersecurity leader, right?
I think there's a more challenging dynamic than maybe, dare I say it, being a CIO. Because a CIO, you're working towards profitability for the organization, being more efficient, etc. Sometimes, though, cybersecurity works against the grain of that. If you're really honest, the most secure system is one that's turned off. But what do? Do I turn off all the systems? No, because the business will not run. So I think we have a challenge around being able to balance running the business, enabling the business to achieve its outcomes, while still having the right level of security. Not saying no to, not being the person who says no to everything, but judging which things to allow to flow through, or what the safest approach might be, versus just outright saying, no, that's an insecure thing to do. Absolutely not. Stop the business. I mean, that's what creates a bad reputation, I think, for cybersecurity, because it's perceived to be a blocker to moving forward, slows things down, and so on. So I have some good mindsets around how we address this in the current day, but I think it's a theme that everyone in cybersecurity faces. You'll find that number one priority is make money for the business. And then everyone will turn around to you and they'll say, okay, so you want me to spend X million dollars on tech. So what value is that going to bring to the business? What revenue is that going to bring in? And it's a different kind of thing. It's like, well, I'm not necessarily directly bringing revenue in. I'm stopping you from being fined. I'm stopping you from being extorted by a threat actor, you know? And then they'll say, but that's never happened to us. Therefore, I think I'll spend my dollars on some AI project that will basically, make us more profitable. Yeah. So I think this is the biggest challenge for CISOs, really. How you articulate the need to make things safer without slowing the business down, without putting impediments in the path, blockers, and trying to create a synergy with the business as well. I think that's the most difficult piece.
Yeah, I agree. I think that getting to synergy with the business and the IT organization in particular, I think that's where a lot of, I think, my hair was lost, over the years. Is just, again, I agree with you. I think that one of my frustrating early experiences when I was doing work as a much younger guy doing work with the U.S. Navy is that we did have an information security team. We called it information assurance inside the Navy at the time, but they were just the department of no. If they didn't understand it, they just said no, right? And then it was, having, as an IT engineer, having to escalate things up to finally get the business to say, hey, we need to make this happen. And then bringing that team back into the room so that we could come to a solution. I think that's not the experience I think that I didn't want to have. I didn't want to have that experience when I was the IT engineer deploying capabilities in the world. And so, I definitely don't take that approach. Am I willing to say no? I'm absolutely willing to say no. But getting me to say no is basically meant we got to an impasse that no one's moving in any direction, right? Because most of the time well, I can't do it that way, but I can do it this way.
I was going to say, don't do it. Okay, it's not no, it's just don't do it this way, do it that way. That's
right.
That's the best angle. I think for me as well, what has really helped is to see things from the other side. So I've been the person speaking to the security leader, trying to get my solution productionized, for example. I mentioned Radiant, so I was often building some technical solution, trying to get it productionized and then rolled out. And sometimes you'd run into some security implications and there'd be me up against the equivalent of a CISO. It was pre-CISO days,
right?
But there's the equivalent of CISO there. And so, yeah, I've been on the other side. So I think seeing things from a 360 perspective really helps in this role. And so I'd recommend this for any new starter coming into cybersecurity or security as a field. Work on something else first. I've always been a proponent of this. For me, cybersecurity is not something you start in. You start in maybe application development, sysadmin, networks, whatever it might be, and then learn how to secure that as a thing that you do next. That's always been my mindset. Some people disagree with that, but
I don't at all. I think that understanding like the pressure that the IT teams are under, whether they're developers or system engineers or network engineers, being in that role, there's a lot of good things about it. One is that you fundamentally get to understand like the technology that you're working on, right? And then two, you get the pressure from the business to say, hey, we have to deliver. When there's a problem, you're the guy that's troubleshooting it, make sure that it works again, restoring availability, right? Or building resilient systems, understanding how resilient systems are made. And these are things that are good skills to have. And, when you're troubleshooting an incident, it's not dissimilar. You're looking at the same log sets, just with a different purpose, right? You might have been looking for the reason there was an error in a log set so that you could restore operations. But on cyber side, you're looking at that log message to see who made a change. Was it an authorized change? Was it an external threat or internal threat? Your lens on the log is a totally different thing. But knowing that there's these logs that exist, that they're there, how that system works, how it interoperates with other systems, I think there's that background will serve you super well as a cybersecurity practitioner. And I think that's what I worry about today is people just kind of like getting into cybersecurity and not understanding how TCP/IP works, or how routing works, or why do you have BGP, or what's an ASN. I think when you don't really understand like how all of that stuff happens, it makes it a lot more difficult to, I think, come to the right conclusion about whether you're under attack or not under attack, or whether this is an authorized event. It's a different way.
Yeah, absolutely, John. Right, and I've got some good examples here. So I've come into contact with a lot of people in network security. So network security maybe isn't the same as cybersecurity, but what I find is very few people who do network security actually know anything about networks.
Yeah.
So for me, that's crazy, because if you're going to secure something, you need to know the thing. So I'll give you a good example of where that becomes a real problem. Some of the biggest threats to an organization, to an enterprise, are the things that are public facing out on the internet. Yeah. DNS, certificates, how you manage certificates, how you manage DNS, how you manage your public IP space. Do you know what? Many organizations don't secure these things. For a threat actor, this is the first thing you start tampering with and start abusing, the external facing persona of an organization. But you see, a lot of network security people, they're focused on where do I deploy my firewalls? How do I configure my IP-based firewall rules? And that's it. And they're not considering, why am I putting these things in place in the first place? What are they there to do? Mm-hmm. So I think something's lost. It's like a lot of people in security are very focused on deploying something, managing something, but what they don't ask is, what is that thing supposed to do? Why is it there? Is it doing the job for which it's intended?
Right.
Is it the best use of our resources to focus on that one thing?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. I mean, I you're saying it in the way I keep thinking about, like IPSs and IDSs, and and there's so many today. I mean, if you went back to, I think, the early 2000s and such, we had a lot of PCAP. We had, if you were in a bigger organization, you were, taking full PCAP, and you could see everything that was, ingress and egressing your environment. And I remember people used to have a quote like, PCAP doesn't lie, right? It's hard to lie through PCAP. But in today's world, I mean, that PCAP, if we had it, I mean, it would be largely non-discernible, just because of certificate management and how applications are deployed today, on SaaS, in SaaS infrastructures, and people are on browsers and they have point-to-point and point-to-point encryption, which, from an IDS or IPS perspective, it's really difficult to see what's going on when it's all encrypted, right? It's like the equivalent of, having your camera pointed at a wall and you just see the wall and that's all you see. Then, you're not really, you don't have an effective solution for that, right? And I think that's one of the things that I think, again, network security people kind of gap on this today is, what is the purpose of my system? What is it intended to do? It's great that you believe that to get compliant for PCI that I need to have a this or a that on there, but in all practicalities, deploying that piece of tech isn't actually delivering what it is that PCI wants you to have, right? It's kind of like a compliant mindset versus a threat mindset or a security mindset, right? It's one thing to have it; it's another thing to make sure it works.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few things to unpack there. Absolutely. So, at the very beginning of this piece, you're talking about IDSs, firewalls. People would do this, deploy those things. Why? Well, generally, especially in the financial sector, it's highly regulated. And some regulation says must have firewall, must have intrusion detection, must have X. Okay. So that's why things get deployed. But it isn't driven by what the threat actors are necessarily doing. And so I think over time, more recently, people are realizing that you might make those investments, but then you still have a breach. I think more recently, you have red teaming that happens, planned adversary engagement simulations, and you'll see that defenses that are in place don't necessarily have an effect in mitigating those attacks. So I think it's important to really understand what the adversarial tradecraft is, and implement the right countermeasures to mitigate the threats. I don't like to use the term controls to mean technology. I prefer to use countermeasures as a means to mitigate some kind of technique or something like that. Controls I see as framework thing. NIST cybersecurity framework has controls. Yeah. And those things, I'm not saying don't follow regulation. I'm not saying don't have those things in place, because it creates a good baseline for an organization. But what it doesn't do is reduce your risk or necessarily mitigate your vulnerability to the threats. So you touched on some other good points there, right? IT has become more as a service based, cloud centric. Proliferation of SaaS services is extreme. So everyone has their Office 365, for example, or G Suite to be vendor agnostic, I guess. Your ERP systems might be in a SaaS service. Your private data might be in a SaaS service. You can't do a PCAP on the internet easily. You don't have the visibility when it isn't your network to examine. And you mentioned as well encryption as well. So this brings to the surface data privacy kind of considerations as well, because today, if you put some security technology in the path and you do TLS decryption or SSL decryption, well, then potentially you might be exposing privileged data to that third-party vendor, and that presents data privacy considerations as well. Do you want to expose? So there's a whole raft of stuff there. What I really do feel, though, and I think it's this is also where SquareX comes in. You need to have the right tool to mitigate the right type of adversarial technique. So what I mean by that is there's value in doing things at the network level. There's value in doing things at the endpoint level. There might be things that are valuable to do in a browser at the browser level to mitigate the adversarial tradecraft. And there's no silver bullet that does everything. You have to look defense in depth, to use a bit of a cliche nowadays.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know why people don't like that, but I mean, defense in depth or defendable architectures, right? You're probably not going to have one set of technology or controls or countermeasures that are going to work. And there's no panacea, right? Nothing works 100% of the time, or at least I haven't seen that technology that works 100% of the time. Let's talk a little bit about your work at Kyndryl, a little bit more about your work at Kyndryl. Or we could talk about the Center for Internet Security, or do you want to talk about CISO special interest groups? What do you think you'd like to talk about?
Hey, I want to talk about all the things. Okay. You mentioned the Center for Internet Security, CIS. Okay. So I contributed and volunteered a little bit on helping to establish some CIS benchmarks. For those who don't know what those are, they're an attempt to define a secure configuration baseline for technology. And why did I get myself involved in that? Well, generally, what drives me is a need. And in that particular case, what I was seeing is I was involved in getting some security service edge SaaS services deployed. But what I observed is it's very difficult to define what a configuration baseline would look like for those services, because they're SaaS. And it's very difficult to get, here is the configuration. Does it align to a set of guardrails? Or are people just configuring what they want? Okay. That variation of configuration is where the security problems come from, or the non-compliance issues come from. So how do you define for tech a configuration baseline that has the right guardrails in it, that you can say, this is what I expect, and monitor that continuously? So that's where CIS benchmarks came in. And I was involved in helping to extend that for a particular SaaS vendor to make sure that there is a configuration baseline for that SaaS vendor. That was first of many SaaS vendors because I don't think they'd really been looking at SaaS so much. They have CIS benchmarks for hyperscaler cloud providers, Microsoft, AWS, and so on, Azure. And they have CIS benchmarks for things like Cisco networks and Palo Alto, Fortinet, Juniper firewalls, etc. Right, those kind of things, right? But not really for SaaS. So that's why I got myself involved in that. Means to an end. This is all part of as well the concept of secure by default versus secure by design. You see, I like to ensure that the ideal state is that anything you deploy is secure by default, meaning rather than a piece of tech have all of the things turned on and you have to selectively turn things off, the flip of that is everything is turned off and you selectively turn things on.
Right.
Now, the latter is a much more secure approach. However, technology vendors have typically followed the route of easy. Okay, so you'll ship a router, for example, or a server, and it will have web UI open. Right? Do I need to use a web UI? No, I'm going to configure it programmatically, but the web UI stays open. Now, threat actors are known for compromising web UIs that are open, or other APIs. API security is a whole other world of pain. Yeah. If all those APIs are open, threat actor can compromise those and have full control over your system. So secure by default, turn all that off. Only enable that thing that you have a purpose. You have a purpose for why you're enabling it, and you know how to do that securely.
Feels like it's a meme now about Fortinet having another vulnerability in their web UI, but Cisco, the same thing, right? And again, to your point, it's like, if you're not going to use the web UI, just turn it off. Just no HTM on your PIX firewall or whatever you're using.
PIX, hey, those are the days. People don't know that the thing is there to be able to turn it off.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest problem, So it's better if everything's turned off and then you turn the thing on. And that's a conscious effort then. So when you should understand why you're turning something on.
Sure.
If you don't, well, that's just some degree incompetence, right? If you turn something on,
people are buying products, right? And they want the full function. They want to get the most value out of it. And they feel like, to get the most value, you have all these features. And I remember, looking at my Microsoft agreement for M365 and having E5 licenses, and it has so many features, right? And to your point, I think, at the time that I was running this analysis, we had like 18% of the features turned on, and we were trying to figure out, how do we take more of it? Right? How do we? And some of them have good business value. You definitely wanted to take advantage of it, to like lower telephony costs. And you have an E5 license. You have Teams that you can have phone numbers attached to it. That's going to help you lower telephony costs in other places. But you actually have to do it, right? You actually have to go through and get it done. But at the same time, like you said, vendors tend to just, especially in SaaS environments, they tend to turn on features whether you want it or you didn't want it or not. Next thing you know, you have users coming to you and your help desk is getting slammed because Teams for Copilot is turned on, and you're like, did we mean to turn that on? No, we didn't mean to turn that on, but it's causing a lot of help desk calls, right? And
yes. So John, let me interject here, right? So I think you hit a nail on the head in terms of these are complex ecosystems of services. And very often, IT teams in enterprises are very focused on a mission and don't necessarily understand all of the widgets here, what the best combination is, the optimal layout, the most economical approach. And I kind of think that's where a global system integrator like Kyndryl comes into the fore, right? And adds the real value, because we kind of help our customers to make the right selection, fine tune their journey, regardless of which stack we're talking about. And we like to take a vendor agnostic approach, where we understand the pros and cons of a particular piece, but being able to navigate those ecosystems is a key value add that we bring, right? And that's part of the rationale what it does, right? There's an all-you-can-eat stuff that you can get from Microsoft or from somebody else, right? But you might just want this thing, right? So
Right.
we understand systems.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the challenge. I think again in cyber is like nothing. I think we have a lot of challenges in cyber. I mean, I think secure by default is a good approach, right? How do we make the secure by default? And this doesn't start with. It starts early on. I think you were saying like, shift left, start with threat models of what could go wrong with this app. And, if you go into your business, you'll see that there's probably several patterns that are normal to your business that you can secure. I mean, that's what I found, at a big tech company was that being the chair of the architecture review board, going through it and seeing, okay, oh, this is yet another way of doing this in our environment. The best way for us to move information between two different security zones may be a proxy, right? That might be better than trying to open up 443 on every one of our firewalls, everything for everything else, and lose all visibility. But we would start building this pattern book for developers and engineers to say, how is it that we're going to deploy this software in our environments? In the military world, one of the networks that I worked on, there were 7 design patterns, depending on how much integration you needed with identity and access management and those kinds of things, or if you just needed transport. And then based on those your parameters, we could put you somewhere on the network where you were able to get what you needed to get done, but we also maintain our security. But there's often, again, I think there are probably, regular patterns in your particular business, and you got to figure those out. Make sure that developers understand what they are, or your engineers understand what they are, so that they're delivering secure solutions into your environment.
So that, John, is actually another element of what I was discussing there, right? So there's some challenges that you have depending on the type of industry. If you were, say, a company like Netflix, for example, let's say Netflix, their architecture looks a certain way because it does a certain thing. Okay,
that's right. Yep.
Whereas a large enterprise like, let's say, a health tech vendor, or it could be a bank, for example, a lot of those are a large sprawl of different tech that looks very different everywhere. Okay, and over time they grow organically. And you have tech debts, and you have hygiene issues, and there's no consistent shape. Okay,
orphan systems.
Yeah. So you start off, some types of organizations, it's easy to have a patternized approach whereby you've got a certain function, certain patterns, and it does a certain thing of a certain shape. Now, a lot of what I try and do is to take the various different blocks of an enterprise and to form security patterns and to version control those security patterns. So let's just say you threat model all of the assets and all of the designs relating to that pattern. And you say, that's version 1.1.0, say, right? But then some component goes obsolete, or there's a new software update, or something needs to change in some way. Okay, well, you threat model the delta. You certify that the new version is also secure, and you say that's 1.1. Okay, but you go, okay, I've now got 1.1, but all these instances that are deployed are 1.0. So then you've got your plan for your uplift. And so this is a way of kind of managing a patternized approach in an enterprise kind of landscape. It's hard work. I'm not saying it's not hard work, but it's a regime to kind of put in place, right? Build those security patterns around your architectures, and version manage them, and then continuously iterate to make sure that any changes drive a evaluation of are you still secure.
I like it. Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about you're working on your master's in cybersecurity. What made you decide to go back to formal education after 25 years in the field?
Okay, so continuous learning is an important thing. I think you probably gathered that from what I've said so far. But also to not assume that you know everything as well. If I take my own studies, I'm doing an MSc in cybersecurity. part-time learning. So I'm doing that within a 10-month period. Part-time, as the professors say, part-time is no time. Thank you for that one. Right, I agree. But what it's actually done is immersed me in some other skill sets that I didn't have, such as machine learning. So I've been having some practical exposure to machine learning models and doing some of my own things around that, adapted to security as well. So part of my dissertation that I don't really have much time to do, but I'm working on right now, involves some of my research is based on leveraging machine learning in a security capacity.
Excellent. That's awesome.
That's a skill that I wouldn't have picked up otherwise. So that's one thing. I think it's a good thing to do. It also reinforces a certain mindset. If I'm doing weekend assignments and I've got a deadline to get that done, that's kind of like my work world, where I might be involved in an RFP response for a large organization with very tight response time.
Right.
Very similar skill. So I think my work reinforces the study. My study reinforces the work. Do I take on too much? Sometimes I do.
Yeah.
But I think all the things that I plug myself into have a purpose in terms of enriching my knowledge and my ability to serve my employer, but also the customers I'm working with as well. So you mentioned CIS, but I've also been doing things with Cloud Security Alliance around Zero Trust to some degree. An organization called ONUG that I've plugged into. I'm in and out with them sometimes.
What is ONUG?
Open Network User Group.
Okay.
So they focus on various different streams as well. So there might be hyper automation work streams. There's one security, zero trust related work streams, etc. The thing is with some of these, they're very they run out of the US. A lot of these, which actually works for me in some sense, in that it doesn't mix with my working day. Because trying to squeeze anything else into my working day is very difficult, right?
Sure.
But sometimes it means me being on a call at 2 a.m. or something, right? Occasionally. I think it's worth it sometimes.
Sure.
But the ability to participate in the industry and help to shape it is of value to me. I have put inputs into various things years ago, various small inputs, but inputs all the same, into IETF, Engineering Task Force. ONUG does stuff. Cloud Security Alliance does stuff. My plugins with CSA are very much focused around zero trust and defining what zero trust is from an industry standpoint, and then also how to communicate that across different personas in an organization. Because people hear words like zero trust, AI is another one, cloud was another one, and people make their own meanings up. They think it means one thing, it means another thing, or they just get tired of them. It's not so much about the words, it's about what it actually is and influencing what it should be. So I like to get into the weeds of that and help to steer. And I mentioned also a lot of these organizations are US-centric. A lot of them focus on US federal stuff, which is all good. If you take Zero Trust, everyone talks about the DoD model, or they talk about some NSA papers or whatever it might be, which is good. But how do you then apply that outside of US federal into enterprise in Asia? So what I try and steer is that, not to be so insular and to consider other countries, other types of enterprises. Not everything is US government driven, but a lot of the things that work in the US government context can be transposed into other types of organizations and other types of geographies. Yeah, sometimes that isn't obvious to some of these groups, right? I mean, they're very focused, but I'm not going to name any one that is this way, but they're very focused on a US-centric mindset. And I've done work with the US, but I'm also working in the ASEAN region. In Asia.
Yeah. And then again, especially working in the ASEAN region, I think that, some of the, from a US mindset and Western mindset is, we definitely think a certain way, right? Like how to defend. But I think that when you start when you're working in ASEAN, especially if you're dealing with China, it's easy to start being offensive to people on taking a particular mindset of who your adversary is, and are they actually the adversary or are they your partner, right? And and a lot of U.S. thinking is and cybersecurity is really based around kind of military and that complex, and with certain kinds of projects, programs and stuff in mind, right? But I do think that also that, and like you said, I think there's a lot of good technology or mind or thinking in that industry, and how to bring it to other industries is very important. I think, for me, having worked in finance and military, manufacturing, telco, et cetera, what I see is that a lot of everyone's kind of on a different journey. What was important to them, in OT and ICS kind of environments, it's really about availability, kind of keeping things safe, operating, those kinds of thinking, because there's usually some other impact that's not just dollar impact, right? There's other kinds of impacts that become important. And, but in those same cases, there are things that the OT environments can learn from IT kind of ways of doing work. And same going from OT to telco to finance. I think that it's just everyone's have their own point of view.
Yeah.
But I often feel like they're adjacent to each other, only in their timeline of where they are in their journey, in their maturity journey. Right. For some folks like on telco, it was really important that they have very strong patterns on how communication happens with your mobile phone, and how that all gets secure when you're putting cell towers on people's buildings and such. That kind of problem isn't a problem that we often have to deal with in IT. Now that we have spent so much time on 5G and everything else, it becomes more of a problem, especially in manufacturing, because they're putting 5G on manufacturing floors. Now these are becoming, OT problems on how do you keep your manufacturing line configurable using 5G technologies rather than rerouting wires every time you have to go redo something, right? And I think that we can learn from those other industries and then apply them into our use cases wherever we are. Right. I think that's one of the things I like about technology, is that it's somewhat applicable.
It's key. Yeah. It's kind of key to kind of, I think a mistake that some people make is they try and apply a certain pattern to everyone. Okay.
Right. Yep.
I think in my type of role, it's very important to kind of like immerse yourself in, for me, it's customers, right? And understand the unique operating environment that they have, and the certain bespoke challenges that they might have in their industry. I mean, we're for example, working with like aviation, for example, versus health tech, versus government, versus banking, all very different. And they'll have their own nuances. And it's important to understand the challenges before trying to impose something, right? So it's kind of key to start there. I think it's a mistake that people make, right? Not really understanding the landscape before they charge in there and start trying to impose a tech solution on top of it. It's kind of key to understand really where the pain points are, especially from a security standpoint.
Agreed.
Very different challenges. Aviation, that's another key one, right? Definitely, it's like the things that you have to think around are significantly different to securing an enterprise.
Absolutely,
and the impacts are very different as well.
Yeah, but I feel like I've been flying around a lot lately. I like to keep the airplanes in the air and make sure I have a safe landing. So do what you can to keep me safe, to keep us all safe, right? But okay, well, let's look ahead towards like AI and automation. As they become more prevalent in cybersecurity, how do you see the role of the CISO evolving?
It's okay. Everyone gravitates to AI. There must be some AI in everything, right? I think it's really
every conversation has to have AI in it nowadays.
It does. It does. Otherwise, it's not interesting to people. There's a few different ways you can look at this one, right? AI for security, security for AI. I'm particularly interested in the latter, right? Security for AI and how you secure an organization's ability to leverage those emerging technologies. So things to consider before people start really pushing out new tech without really understanding, going ahead blindly without really understanding the potential implications. So if we take, for example, the latest theme, agentic AI, it potentially enables AI to go out and collect data from all manner of different systems. Now, when you do that in an enterprise, potentially you have a gateway to all of your internal data. So unless you control and secure that in an adequate way, you're really expanding your exposure. Some of these technologies are very seductive in terms of what they can do and bring to an organization. And people, especially technologists, get seduced by tech. I know, I do. The amount of times I play around with different Gen AI models all the time, generating this or that type of output, or taking security standards and comparing and contrasting them through Gen AI. Right? It saves time. It's really interesting, but I think from an enterprise standpoint, understanding what threat actors can do and what the potential implications might be for your organization is key. And so I think everything I described before around threat modeling applies. Understanding how you can contain systems, how you can control data, data going out, data coming in. Also, if you're going to maybe generate code, because a lot of these systems can generate code for you, right? Are you going to take that code, trust it implicitly, and then put it into your production system to run? Or are you going to do some input validation of that code? Are you going to examine it to see if it's been polluted? There might be some weaknesses that are inherent to that, because the AI model might be based on some inherently weak model data. So you need to consider all these things. Now, the kind of frameworks I lean into, OWASP has done quite a lot of good work around the top 10 for AI and the top 10 for machine learning. They make that distinction. Predictive machine learning versus things like Gen AI, different threats. Okay, with Gen AI being part of the overall AI cloud, if you like. Also MITRE Atlas too. So a lot of good work has been done, quite like MITRE ATT&CK. The key difference there is that with MITRE ATT&CK, there has to have been evidence of that those tactics, techniques, and procedures being exploited in the wild. Whereas MITRE Atlas didn't have that luxury, that there hadn't at the time been that much evidence of these potential
prompt
vectors being
right.
Yeah, so that's a key difference, right? But I see that as a good basis for looking at the threats, right, and how it applies across a matrix there, and the things that threat actors might do to compromise AI systems. So I think there's other things you need to look at. You need to understand, how I'm going to get visibility into what goes out. There's considerations for what you might do for DLP, for example, data loss prevention, and so on. But I think ultimately it's the same answer to any tech, be it OT, ICS, enterprise tech, AI, cloud, and so on. It's just another tech stack. It's no.
And kind of going back to what you were saying, it's like, make sure you understand the threat models, right? Make sure you understand what your countermeasure is going to be. Understand the capabilities of your organization. If your organization doesn't have good data classifications or labeling like skills, then just opening up Microsoft Copilot or Google Gemini to your whole data stack may not be the most prudent measure to make. And you might want to use those technologies, but you got to then figure out how it is that you're going to control control
Yeah, so that's
access to that systems and such.
so there's two pieces, right? Securing AI, right, and then AI for security. I think this is another dangerous game because everyone wants to sell something that has an AI component to it because they think needs to be AI powered or powered by Copilot or powered by Gemini or powered by ChatGPT or whatever it might be. Okay, OpenAI, but there's certain risks involved in that and certain data privacy considerations involved in that. And what I think the industry is lacking is the handling of AI systems and data within AI systems within vendor offerings. So sometimes if I was an enterprise onboarding some tech, like the previous place I was working, right? Some vendors might say, "Oh, but don't you know we've got some AI on this?" By saying that, they've instantly made their job significantly harder because now they need to evidence to the organization how they're managing and governing that AI, right, for data privacy reasons, and when you lack audits around that type of tech, well, then how can you ensure the safety of that data? So it creates a real problem, I think, for enterprises in terms of understanding safety.
Yeah. And what you were saying earlier about secure by default, right? And what I was saying about, the push for SaaS vendors to just enable features. And they've already gone through security reviews and everything else, but now they have an AI feature and it's been turned on in your environment. That doesn't bode well for security organizations. That, again, totally depends on the maturity of your organization and how well you do certain kinds of activities. But I think, with how much data is being grown into like OneDrive every single day, and the idea that people are classifying those things or putting the right kind of controls or not sharing them openly, I think it puts a lot of pressure on the business to kind of secure it. Let me ask a couple more. Oh, go ahead.
John, right? So a couple of times, this is actually quite scary. I've heard people in the security industry say, "Hey, we're linking our SIM platform to some. We're using ChatGPT, OpenAI right now, and to get some security related insights around our security events." And they're using public models, right?
Yeah.
With unlimited data retention.
Right.
So yeah, I think there's a need to make sure that you're using closed models if you're going to do that. There's some great ones out there. I know Microsoft has Security Copilot from their stack perspective, and they all do, right. Closed models are designed for the purpose. Let's go in that direction.
Well, for someone considering a career in cybersecurity today, especially if they want to reach the CISO level, what would you tell them about the skills and experiences that matter most? I mean, and is there anything that you would do differently? I think we kind of covered this earlier in the conversation, but is there anything new that we want to add to this?
Well, I think new stuff. So I mentioned the tech piece, but I think it's also important to know that there are different flavors of what a CISO is. You see, so some of my voluntary work plugging into the AISP CISO special interest group, part of that is to help define what it means in Singapore to be a CISO. And there's various different flavors there. And some are very governance, risk and compliance focused. Some are from a tech perspective. Some, like myself, are aligned to the vendor space, like field CISOs, etc. Okay, very, very different. In fact, I came across a CISO in that community who actually reported to the chief legal officer. And that was a different dynamic, but it got me thinking. It's like, actually, that makes sense in some contexts. So there's various different flavors. It depends what angle you want to go into. But I would kind of say that it's not a job that you start with. There's various different steps in order to get to that level. And it's not about seniority. It's about building the foundations of a house. So building a house, you need to have foundations, right? You don't put the roof in before you've actually built the walls, put the windows in, put the foundations there. etc. Put some stairs in, right? The CISO is the roof. Yeah. So I think you need to, if you're going to take a technical route, you need to kind of have a technical background, understand the things that need to be secured before trying to secure them. That's key view from my perspective. If you're going to come from a governance, risk and compliance angle, start in risk and controls type roles. Understand what risk really is. Understand risk management methodologies. Understand how to quantify risk. Understand the difference between risk and compliance. Some people don't even understand, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not the same thing. So I think there's that, and then also there are other skills, as you mentioned, John. It's like you need to have a certain amount of financial savvy. You need to be able to communicate at board level with senior stakeholders. Strong communication skills are key. Being able to influence is another skill. I think the soft skills are an underrated part of this, but definitely are some of the most important piece. Perhaps even more important than some of the tech, I would say. You need to have the tech, but you absolutely do need to be able to communicate and be able to articulate something to less technical audiences, and be able to influence. These are key for a CISO role, in my view.
Yeah, I think for sure. I think that I think for me, if there was anything that I would want to change early on in my career, is understanding influence better, understanding politics better. I think that's understanding, I guess, people and what's making them tick. Because it's not really about it's not about the facts of the situation. There's usually some sort of other underlying current that happens there, and being able to discern that and being empathetic in some ways to understanding someone else's point of view. I think that is something I wish that I had spent more time learning earlier in my career than waiting to be a CISO and being kind of thrust into it.
It's not an easy one to learn. It's like, I'm sure there are books that exist nowadays, navigating company politics, but it's a more difficult thing to learn. I kind of feel that you do need to have some falls. You need to make some mistakes.
Absolutely.
To learn from those mistakes, right? I think that's and that's why it's a journey to get to the sort of CISO roles where you're getting to understand how to influence and how to politically navigate. I don't think that's something that you can start day one. You need to have some falls, make some mistakes, learn by experience. I think that's the key. That's why it takes so long, right? And that's key.
Yeah, I think also, what works in one organization doesn't work in another organization as well. Yeah, so definitely you and I both have the same kind of opinion that, hey, soft skills.
Well, can I just say something else that's kind of key here as well, right? Something else that's super key. There's how things are across different countries is quite important to understand. Yeah,
sure.
So working for some of the banks I was working for previously, I was working in a global role for a US bank in London and then to Singapore. So I would find myself on calls with guys in New York, 2 a.m. for me. And then at 6 a.m., I might be on calls with guys in Japan or girls, right, whatever. Okay. Now, with the New Yorkers, there's a certain way that you deal with a call, and everyone's trying to get their voice heard, and they'll talk all over each other, and it's quite aggressive. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now you have to operate a certain way, right? Now, if you pivot and you try the same approach, and you're speaking to various places in Asia, ASEAN region, Japan, and you apply the same approach, you'll get shut out. You'll be on a fast road to nowhere. Okay.
Absolutely.
And so this is key to understand, right? How you operate cross culturally is absolutely key. Sometimes I feel the tech doesn't vary so much, but the people absolutely do vary in terms of what they deem to be acceptable, how you should be working with them. Covering ASEAN region, for example, if I took, say, Indonesia or some of the other countries as well, countries whereby face-to-face interaction is still valued. Getting on a call, a Zoom call or a Teams call or whatever it might be, isn't seen to be adequate to kind of like seal the deal. Okay, so you need to understand the cultural dynamics and operate within that, and that's very, very important across this region, which is so many countries, all very different from each other, fragmented regulation. It's very different operating in this region versus, say, operating in EU or the US.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with you. Just dealing with a multinational corporation based out of Singapore, working in the area, it is different. How you deal with Korea and the regulators of Korea is different from Japan and of course, Singapore and China. They're very, very different kinds of fields. And, what's, like you said, what's acceptable behavior is completely different than what it would be in the US or the EU. Right, for sure, especially UK and the rest of Europe as well. There's some definitely differences, but culturally.
I've seen some super senior people in some organizations make the mistake of misjudging that, right? And walking in and trying to pitch a certain thing and achieving zero success and alienating people from day one. I've seen that happen. Right? It's very, very key.
Yeah, I've hit that wall myself. So good advice. So as we end the show, I heard that you went to our CISO roundtable last week.
I certainly did. Yeah.
How was it? How was the experience for you? In one sentence, what would you say about the CISO roundtable?
Oh, I don't only get one sentence. I'll say a few things. Right? Yeah. Vivek is incredibly well connected. So there's always a very good crowd, but there's always very strong people on panels. So I've seen Jeff Moss from founder of Black Hat there, previous event. Daniel, one of the CISOs at Google, was there this time.
Yep.
I have to hold myself back from dominating some of the questions, Q&A conversations. I have a habit of probing. But one of the things I see in these events is based around technical content. So many events right now don't have any technical content. It's what do you think about AI? What is the convergence of AI and security?
Right.
Blah, blah, blah. Whereas I find that SquareX events are really focused around the mission and it delves into the technical and there's some good discourse, good attendees, and some great food as well. Hey.
Excellent. Very good. Well, thanks for your time today, Perry. It's good to talk to you again. And I'm looking forward to our next conversation.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed it.